Hello friends, please like and subscribe to the channel and enjoy the stories. Chapter 1. The Unexpected Encounter. In the bustling streets of Montreal, winter had tightened its icy grip. The wind howled through the narrow alleyways, carrying with it a hint of fresh snow and the faint aroma of roasted chestnuts from a street vendor's cart. Amidst the chaos of a Friday evening, where laughter and hurried footsteps blended into the city's symphony, 22-year-old Elena stood in the doorway of a small cafe. Her gloved hands cradled a cup of steaming hot cocoa as she gazed out at the swirling snow. Elena was a contradiction in every sense. Her quiet demeanor often masked a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. She loved books more than people, and found solace in the predictable rhythm of her days. But something about that night felt different. A nagging sensation she couldn't quite place, like a melody she'd heard before, but couldn't remember the lyrics to. As she sipped her cocoa, a sudden commotion outside caught her attention. A man stumbled into view, his face partially obscured by a scarf and snowflakes. He seemed out of place, not just in the cold, but in the city itself, as if Montreal wasn't his intended destination. Elena couldn't help but watch as he clumsily navigated the icy sidewalk. His tall frame seemed to carry an awkwardness that made him stand out. A sudden gust of wind blew his scarf aside, revealing piercing gray eyes framed by tousled dark hair. Their eyes met for the briefest moment, and something flickered. A spark, a question, or perhaps an answer. He hesitated, then walked toward the cafe, his boots crunching against the freshly fallen snow. The bell above the door chimed as he stepped inside, bringing with him a rush of cold air and the scent of pine. He scanned the room, his gaze landing on Elena. "Is this seat taken?" he asked, gesturing to the chair across from her. His voice was deep, tinged with an accent she couldn't place. Elena blinked, surprised. The cafe was nearly empty. He could have sat anywhere. "No, go ahead," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. He set down a leather satchel that looked as though it had seen better days. As he removed his gloves, Elena noticed faint scars across his knuckles, like traces of a story untold. "I'm Alex," he said, extending a hand. "Elena," she replied, shaking it. His hand was warm, a stark contrast to the cold outside. Their conversation started hesitantly, like strangers testing the waters of familiarity. He was a traveler, he explained, passing through on his way to nowhere in particular. She found herself intrigued by his vagueness, his refusal to conform to the linear narratives most people offered about themselves. As the hours passed, the cafe emptied, leaving just the two of them. The snow outside had turned into a blizzard, but neither seemed to notice. They spoke of everything and nothing. Her love for poetry, his fascination with old maps, their shared disdain for small talk. But there was an air of mystery about Alex, a guardedness that only made Elena more curious. He never mentioned family or friends, and when she asked about his travels, his answers were evasive, almost as if he were hiding something. When the clock struck midnight, the cafe owner politely informed them it was closing time. They stepped outside, the world around them transformed into a winter wonderland. The snow glistened under the streetlights, and the silence was almost sacred. "Thank you for the company," Alex said, his breath visible in the cold air. "Likewise," Elena replied, though she wished she could say more. He hesitated, as if debating something. Then, without warning, he reached into his satchel and pulled out an old, weathered journal. "I want you to have this," he said, handing it to her. "What is it?" she asked, turning it over in her hands. "An unfinished story," he replied cryptically. "Maybe you can find the ending." Before she could ask what he meant, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the snowstorm. Elena stood there, the journal in her hands, her heart pounding. She opened it, her breath catching as she read the first page. "To Elena, this is the story of how we met, but it's also the story of how I had to leave you." Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages, each one chronicling the night they had just spent together. Every word, every glance, every detail. And then at the very end, a single sentence scrawled in his handwriting. "When you read this, I'll be gone. But maybe, just maybe, we'll meet again." Elena looked up, the snow falling heavier now. Alex was nowhere in sight. Her mind raced with questions, but one thing was certain. Her predictable life had just become anything but. Chapter 2. The Puzzle Left Behind. Elena didn't sleep that night. The journal sat on the kitchen table, its frayed edges and faintly musty scent pulling her back to it over and over again. She flipped through the pages under the dim light of her small apartment, her fingers tracing the handwritten words. The writing was beautiful, fluid and deliberate, like Alex had poured his soul into it. But the more she read, the more unsettled she felt. It wasn't just that he had captured every detail of their evening. The sound of the cafe doorbell, the way her hair fell over her shoulder, the nervous way she fiddled with her scarf. What unnerved her most was how much he seemed to know about her before they had even met. There were passages that spoke of her favorite book, a worn copy of The Night Circus she kept on her nightstand. Mentions of her tendency to walk along the Lachine Canal whenever she needed to clear her head. Even the fact that she had broken her wrist when she was 10 after falling out of a tree, something she hadn't told anyone in years. The final pages were blank, as though he had intended to write more, but hadn't had the chance. By dawn, Elena's unease had given way to determination. She needed answers. Who was Alex? How had he known so much about her? And why had he left so abruptly? She decided to start with the journal itself. The cover was leather, worn and cracked, with a faint embossing of a compass on the front. Inside the back cover, she found a faint inscription, property of A. Grayson. That was something. A name, but no address, no other identifying details. She spent the next few hours scouring the internet. The name A. Grayson yielded hundreds of results. Authors, musicians, even a photographer, but nothing that matched the Alex she had met. Frustrated but unwilling to give up, she turned her attention to the journal's contents, hoping for some hidden clue. It was then she noticed something strange. On one of the pages, certain letters were darker than the others, as though Alex had pressed harder on the pen. At first, it seemed random, but as she traced the pattern, a word began to emerge. Arcanum. Elena frowned. The word sounded vaguely familiar, but she couldn't place it. A quick search revealed its meaning. Something secret, mysterious, or esoteric. But that didn't get her any closer to Alex. She bundled up and headed out into the crisp morning air, the journal tucked safely in her bag. If Alex wasn't going to provide answers, maybe someone else could. Her first stop was the cafe where they had met. The bell above the door jingled as she entered. The same barista from the night before stood behind the counter, her curly hair pulled into a loose bun. "Back so soon?" the barista asked, with a smile. Elena hesitated. "Actually, I was wondering if you remember the guy I was with last night. Tall, dark hair, kind of mysterious." The barista's brow furrowed. "I saw you sitting alone. Are you okay?" Elena blinked. "No, he was definitely here. We talked for hours." The barista shook her head. "I'm sorry, but I only saw you." A chill ran down Elena's spine. Was it possible Alex hadn't been there at all? But then how did she have the journal? She thanked the barista and stepped back into the cold, her thoughts racing. If the barista hadn't seen Alex, did that mean no one had? Her next stop was a local bookstore, one she often frequented. The owner, a kind older man named Henry, greeted her warmly. "Elena, haven't seen you in a while. What brings you in?" She hesitated, then pulled the journal from her bag. "Have you ever seen anything like this?" Henry adjusted his glasses and took the journal, flipping through it carefully. "Interesting," he murmured. "The style of this leather binding is rare, European, probably late 19th or early 20th century. And this compass symbol," he paused, tapping the cover. "It's associated with a secret society." "A secret society?" Elena echoed, incredulous. "Yes, though most of the stories about it are just myths. They were said to be a group of explorers and scholars who believed in preserving knowledge that couldn't be explained by science. They called themselves the Arcanum." The word sent a jolt through her. "What kind of knowledge?" Henry shrugged. "Maps to hidden places, ancient texts, artifacts with strange properties. But like I said, it's probably just a story." Elena wasn't so sure. She thanked Henry and left, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. As she walked back to her apartment, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She glanced over her shoulder, but the streets were empty, save for the occasional passerby. When she reached her building, she noticed something on her doorstep, a small envelope tucked neatly under the mat. Her heart raced as she opened it, pulling out a single piece of paper. The handwriting was unmistakable. Meet me at the old train station at midnight. Come alone. Her breath caught. Questions swirled in her mind, but one thing was certain. She would be there. Whatever Alex was hiding, she was determined to uncover it. Chapter 3: The Midnight Rendezvous. The old train station stood on the outskirts of the city, long abandoned and forgotten by most. Its grand facade, once a proud display of Victorian architecture, was now cloaked in shadows and decay. Broken windows glinted like jagged teeth under the faint light of a distant street lamp, and the once bustling platforms were silent, consumed by years of neglect. Elena arrived a few minutes before midnight, her breath clouding the cold air. She clutched the journal tightly to her chest, its weight both a comfort and a reminder of the mystery she was chasing. The stillness of the station was unnerving. The only sounds were the crunch of her boots on the snow-dusted ground and the faint rustle of wind through the gaps in the building. She hesitated at the entrance, glancing around for any sign of Alex. "Come on, Elena," she whispered to herself, taking a deep breath. The interior of the station was a cavernous hall, its once brilliant chandeliers reduced to skeletal frames. Moonlight filtered through the cracked roof, casting eerie patterns on the walls. Elena's footsteps echoed as she made her way toward the center of the room. "Alex," she called, her voice trembling slightly. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. "Right on time," Alex said, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of urgency. He looked different now. Gone was the awkward traveler from the cafe. His posture was confident, his expression focused. He wore a long coat that billowed slightly as he walked toward her, his gray eyes sharper than she remembered. "You came," he said, stopping a few feet away. "You left me no choice," Elena replied, holding up the journal. "What is this, Alex? How do you know so much about me? And why does everyone act like you don't exist?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I owe you an explanation, but it's not as simple as you think." "Try me." He hesitated, then gestured to one of the old benches nearby. "Sit. This might take a while." Elena reluctantly sat down, keeping the journal close. Alex remained standing, pacing slightly as he spoke. "I wasn't lying when I said I was a traveler," he began. "But I'm not just wandering aimlessly. I'm part of something bigger than myself, bigger than both of us. The Arcanum." Elena's breath hitched. "Henry mentioned them. He said they're some kind of secret society." Alex nodded. "That's one way to put it. The Arcanum is dedicated to uncovering knowledge that defies explanation. Maps to forgotten worlds, objects imbued with strange powers, and sometimes people." "People?" "Yes," he said, his gaze locking onto hers. "People like you." Elena's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, people like me?" "You're special, Elena. You have a connection to something ancient, something the Arcanum has been trying to understand for centuries. That's why I was sent to find you." Her grip on the journal tightened. "Sent? So all of this, meeting me, giving me the journal, was planned?" "At first, yes," he admitted. "But then I got to know you and it stopped being just another assignment." Elena shook her head, rising to her feet. "You're not making any sense. What connection? What are you talking about?" Alex reached into his coat and pulled out a small object. It was a compass, similar to the one embossed on the journal, but its needle spun wildly, refusing to settle. "This compass doesn't point north," he said. "It points to anomalies, places, objects, and people who don't belong in the ordinary world. It led me to you." "That's ridiculous," Elena said, though a part of her wasn't so sure. "Is it?" Alex challenged, stepping closer. "Think about your life, Elena. Haven't you ever felt different? Like you didn't quite fit in, like there was something about you that even you couldn't explain?" She wanted to deny it, to laugh in his face and walk away. But deep down, she couldn't. He was right. She had always felt out of place, like there was a part of her that didn't belong in the world she knew. "Why me?" she whispered. "I don't know," Alex admitted. "That's what the Arcanum wants to find out. But there are others who are interested in you, too, people who don't have good intentions." Elena's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "There's a reason I had to leave so suddenly," he said. "We were being watched, and if they find you before we do, they'll use you for their own purposes." "Who's they?" Alex's expression darkened. "A rival group. They believe in exploiting anomalies, not understanding them. They'll stop at nothing to get what they want. Elena's mind spun with questions, but one thing was clear. She was in over her head. "What do I do?" she asked. "You come with me," Alex said. "I'll keep you safe, and together we'll figure out what this connection of yours means." Elena hesitated. Could she trust him? He had lied to her, manipulated her into meeting him, but he had also protected her, given her answers when no one else could. Before she could decide, the faint sound of footsteps echoed through the station. "Too late," Alex muttered, his eyes narrowing. From the shadows, several figures emerged. They were dressed in dark clothing, their faces obscured. One of them stepped forward, holding a device that emitted a low hum. "Hand her over, Grayson," the figure said. "You know she doesn't belong to you." "She doesn't belong to anyone," Alex replied, his voice cold. The tension in the air was palpable. Elena's heart pounded as she stepped closer to Alex. "What do they want with me?" she whispered. "Nothing good," he replied, his hand tightening around the compass. And then, without warning, the figures lunged. Chapter 4: Into the Unknown. The figures moved with alarming speed, their dark forms gliding across the dilapidated train station like shadows given life. Elena barely had time to react before Alex grabbed her arm and pulled her behind him. "Stay close," he said, his voice low and firm. The leader of the group raised the humming device, and with a sharp click, it released a pulse of energy. The air crackled, and a nearby bench exploded into splinters, the sound echoing through the cavernous space. "Run!" Alex shouted. He didn't wait for her to answer, yanking her toward a side door as another blast shattered the floor where they'd been standing moments before. Adrenaline surged through Elena as she sprinted beside him, the journal clutched tightly to her chest. They burst through the side door and into the snowy night. The icy air hit Elena's face like a slap, but she didn't stop. Alex led her down a narrow alley, their breath visible in the cold as they ran. Behind them, the sound of footsteps grew louder, closer. "This way," Alex said, veering sharply into another alley. Elena struggled to keep up, her legs burning and her lungs heaving. The city was a labyrinth of frozen streets and abandoned buildings, and Alex seemed to know every twist and turn. "Where are we going?" she managed to gasp. "Somewhere safe," he replied. They turned a corner and found themselves in front of a decrepit warehouse. Alex pulled a key from his pocket and shoved it into a rusted lock, wrenching the heavy door open. "Inside! Quick!" Elena didn't hesitate, darting through the doorway. Alex followed and slammed the door shut behind them, sliding a metal bar across it for good measure. The warehouse was vast and dimly lit, its concrete walls lined with shelves of old machinery and crates. The air smelled of oil and rust, and their hurried footsteps echoed ominously. "Will they find us here?" Elena asked, her voice trembling. "They'll try," Alex said, scanning the room. "But this place is shielded." "Shielded?" He pulled her toward a corner where a strange contraption sat, a jumble of wires, gears, and glowing crystals. "The Arcanum has safe houses like this all over the world," Alex explained as he began fiddling with the device. "Places where anomalies, like you, can't be tracked." Before Elena could respond, the door rattled violently. Muffled voices called out from the other side. "They're here," she whispered, her heart pounding. Alex muttered a curse under his breath. "This isn't good. They shouldn't have been able to track us so quickly." "What do we do?" "We activate this," he said, pointing to the contraption. "It's a portal." Elena stared at him, incredulous. "A portal? To where?" "Anywhere but here," he said, twisting a dial. The device began to hum, its crystals glowing brighter. The door shook again, harder this time, and Elena could hear the sound of metal being cut. "We don't have much time," Alex said, grabbing her hand. "Trust me." Elena hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to run in the opposite direction, to find safety in the familiar. But nothing about her life was familiar anymore. "Okay," she said, gripping his hand tightly. The portal sparked to life, a swirling vortex of light and color that seemed to ripple through the air. Elena could feel its pull, a strange sensation that made her stomach flip. "Go!" Alex shouted, pushing her toward the portal. She hesitated for only a second before stepping into the swirling light. The world around her dissolved into a kaleidoscope of colors and sensations, a rushing wind, a low hum that vibrated through her bones, and the faint, fleeting sense of falling. When she emerged on the other side, she stumbled, landing on a soft patch of grass. The air was warm and fragrant, filled with the sound of chirping insects and the distant rush of water. Elena looked around, her breath catching. They were no longer in the city. Instead, they stood in a lush, vibrant forest, its towering trees draped with vines that glowed faintly in the dim light. The sky above was a deep shade of violet, dotted with unfamiliar constellations. Alex appeared beside her, slightly out of breath. "We made it. Where are we?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "A safe zone," Alex replied. "One of the Arcanum's hidden sanctuaries. We're off the grid here, at least for now." Elena rose to her feet, still clutching the journal. Her mind swirled with questions, but one pressed harder than the rest. "What do they want with me?" she asked, turning to Alex. He hesitated, his expression unreadable. "I told you, you're connected to something ancient, something powerful. They think you're the key to unlocking it. What is it?" Alex glanced around as if the trees themselves might be listening. "I don't know for sure, but I think it's a doorway to another world." Elena stared at him, her pulse quickening. "Another world? Like this one?" "Not exactly," he said. "But if they find it first, it could mean disaster. Not just for you, but for everyone." Before Elena could respond, a low rumble echoed through the forest. Alex tensed, his hand going to the compass around his neck. "They're coming," he said grimly. Elena looked around, her heart pounding. "I thought this place was safe." "It was," Alex said, his jaw tightening. "But nothing stays safe for long when you're part of the Arcanum." As the rumbling grew louder, Elena realized two things. She had stepped into a world far stranger than she could have imagined, and there was no turning back. Chapter 5: The Hunter's Arrival. The rumble grew into a roar, shaking the ground beneath Elena's feet. She clutched Alex's arm, her eyes darting toward the treetops as a burst of energy lit up the violet sky. "Alex, what is that?" she asked, her voice trembling. He didn't answer right away. His focus was on the compass, which spun wildly in his hand. The glowing vines around them dimmed as if the forest itself was reacting to the approaching threat. "They've found us," he said grimly. "They must have a tracker. I didn't think they'd risk using one here." "Who's they?" Elena demanded, her frustration cutting through her fear. "The Concordia," Alex said, his tone dripping with disdain. "They're the ones hunting you. They exploit anomalies for power, bending reality to their will." "And they want to exploit me?" "They think you're a gateway," Alex said, his eyes meeting hers. "And they'll destroy anything that gets in their way." The forest around them seemed to come alive with sound, branches snapping, footsteps crunching against the ground. Alex grabbed her hand and pulled her forward. "We can't stay here," he said. "Follow me." They plunged deeper into the forest, the bioluminescent plants flickering faintly in their wake. Elena's heart pounded as she ran, the journal tucked under her arm. The sounds of pursuit grew louder behind them. Shouts, heavy footsteps, and an unnatural hum that sent chills up her spine. "Do you have a plan, or are we just running blindly?" she called out. "There's another portal ahead," Alex said, his voice strained. "It's risky, but it's our only chance." "Define risky." "Unstable," Alex replied. "It might take us where we need to go, or somewhere worse." "Great," Elena muttered, pushing herself to keep up. Suddenly, the forest opened up into a clearing. In the center stood a massive stone archway, its surface etched with intricate symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. Beneath it, a swirling vortex of light and shadow churned, its edges crackling with energy. "That's our way out," Alex said, pulling her toward the arch. But before they could reach it, a figure stepped into the clearing. It was one of the Concordia hunters, a tall, imposing man dressed in black armor that shimmered like obsidian. His face was obscured by a sleek helmet, but his voice rang out, cold and commanding. "You can't run forever, Grayson," the man said, "and you can't protect her. Hand her over, and we'll make this quick." "Not a chance," Alex shot back, stepping in front of Elena. The hunter raised a strange weapon, a sleek, rod-like device that emitted a low hum. Elena recognized the sound. It was the same kind of weapon that had blasted apart the cafe bench. "Stay back," Alex whispered to her. Before the hunter could fire, Alex pulled a small device from his coat, a disc-like object that began to glow. He threw it to the ground, and a shimmering barrier sprang up around them. The hunter's weapon discharged, but the energy blast dissipated against the barrier with a crackling sizzle. "Move, Elena," Alex shouted, grabbing her hand again. They bolted for the archway, but more hunters emerged from the trees, encircling them. Each carried a similar weapon, their movements precise and coordinated. "We're surrounded," Elena said, panic creeping into her voice. Alex's eyes darted to the portal. "We're going through," he said. "But you said it's unstable." "We don't have a choice." The hunters raised their weapons in unison, and Alex threw up another barrier, but this one flickered under the strain. "Elena, listen to me," Alex said, his voice urgent. "When I say go, you run through that portal and don't look back." "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you," he promised. Elena hesitated, fear and uncertainty warring within her. But the look in Alex's eyes, intense, unwavering, gave her the courage she needed. "Okay," she said, nodding. The barrier collapsed with a burst of light, and the hunters surged forward. "Now!" Alex shouted. Elena sprinted toward the portal, the swirling vortex seeming to call to her. She didn't look back, even as she heard the clash of weapons and shouts behind her. The moment she reached the arch, she felt a powerful force pulling her forward. She closed her eyes and leaped into the swirling light. The sensation was even more intense than before, colors and sounds blending into a chaotic storm. She felt weightless and heavy all at once, her thoughts muddled as reality itself seemed to twist around her. Then, with a jolt, she landed hard on a stone floor. Elena gasped, looking around. She was in a massive chamber, lit by an otherworldly glow. The walls were carved with the same symbols she had seen on the archway, and at the center of the room stood a pedestal holding a crystal that pulsed with light. But Alex was nowhere to be seen. "Alex," she called, her voice echoing in the chamber. Silence. Her heart sank as the realization hit her. He hadn't followed her. Before she could process her fear, the sound of footsteps echoed through the chamber. She turned to see another figure emerging from the shadows. Not a hunter, but a tall woman with piercing eyes and a cloak embroidered with golden symbols. "You made it," the woman said, her voice calm but commanding. "Who are you?" Elena asked, backing away. The woman smiled faintly. "A friend. And if we're to save Alex and uncover the truth about who you really are, we have much to discuss." Final chapter. The Truth Beneath the Stars. Elena stared at the woman, her breath catching in her throat. There was something magnetic about her presence, calm, commanding, yet oddly familiar. "Who are you?" Elena asked again, her voice trembling but firm. The woman stepped closer, her cloak trailing behind her like liquid gold. "I am called Ceres," she said, inclining her head, "and I am one of the Arcanum's custodians." "You're with Alex," Elena said, a flicker of hope igniting within her. "I was," Ceres replied, her expression darkening, "until he went rogue." Elena's heart skipped. "Rogue? What are you talking about?" "He saved me. He's been protecting me." Ceres studied her for a long moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. Finally, she sighed. "Alex was tasked with bringing you here to this sanctuary, but somewhere along the way he broke protocol. He withheld information. He made enemies of the Concordia by taking you off their grid." "Because they would have hurt me," Elena snapped. "Yes," Ceres said, nodding. "But in doing so, he put both of you in greater danger. You see, Elena, you're more than an anomaly. You're the keeper of the threshold." "The what?" Elena said, her voice thick with disbelief. Ceres gestured toward the glowing crystal on the pedestal. "That is the threshold, a gateway between worlds, realms, and possibilities. It is ancient, older than anything you can imagine. It binds the fabric of reality together, and only a keeper can control it." Elena shook her head, stepping back. "No, you've got the wrong person. I'm just me." "You are more than you know," Ceres said gently. "The journal Alex gave you, it isn't a record of your past. It's a guide to your future. You've felt it, haven't you? The pull, the dreams. You were always meant to find this place." Elena clutched the journal tighter, the weight of Ceres's words pressing down on her. "If that's true, why didn't Alex tell me?" "Because he cared too much," Ceres said, a note of sadness in her voice. "He wanted to protect you from the burden of the truth. But the truth can't be avoided, Elena. Not anymore." Before Elena could respond, a loud crack echoed through the chamber. The air shimmered, and a portal ripped open near the entrance. Out stepped Alex, his coat torn and his face bruised, but his gray eyes burning with determination. Behind him, the Concordia hunters poured through, their weapons raised. "Elena!" Alex shouted, his voice a mix of relief and urgency. "Stay back!" Cirrus moved swiftly, positioning herself between Elena and the intruders. With a flick of her wrist, she conjured a barrier of golden light that shimmered like a shield. "You've led them here," Cirrus said, her tone sharp. "I didn't have a choice," Alex replied, his voice tight. "They were right behind me, but I can hold them off." "No," Elena said, stepping forward. "I'm done running." Both Alex and Cirrus turned to her, surprise flickering across their faces. "Elena, you don't understand what you're up against," Alex said. "No, you don't understand," she shot back. "This is about me, isn't it? The threshold, the Concordia, all of it. If I'm the keeper, then it's time I started acting like it." Cirrus's gaze softened, and she gave a slight nod. "Then take your place, keeper." Elena approached the pedestal, her heart pounding. The crystal pulsed in rhythm with her steps, its glow intensifying as she reached out to touch it. The moment her fingers brushed its surface, a surge of energy coursed through her. Images flashed before her eyes, worlds colliding, doors opening and closing, and an endless web of connections that stretched beyond comprehension. She saw Alex standing by her side. She saw Cirrus, watching with quiet resolve. She saw the Concordia hunters, their faces masks of anger and fear. And she saw herself, not as she was, but as she could be. The keeper of the threshold. The energy within her swelled, and she turned to face the hunters. Raising her hand, she felt the power of the threshold respond, weaving through her like a current. "Enough," she said, her voice steady and commanding. A wave of light erupted from her hands, sweeping through the chamber. The hunters froze, their weapons clattering to the ground as the light enveloped them. One by one, they vanished, their forms dissolving into the air. When the light faded, the chamber was silent. Alex stepped forward, his expression a mixture of awe and relief. "You did it," he said softly. Elena turned to him, her eyes glowing faintly with the power of the threshold. "We did it." Cirrus approached, her face calm but serious. "You've taken your first step, Elena, but the journey isn't over. The threshold is both a gift and a responsibility. It will challenge you, test you. Are you ready for that?" Elena glanced at Alex, then back at Cirrus. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a sense of clarity. "I'm ready," she said. As the chamber dimmed and the energy settled, Elena knew her life would never be the same. She had stepped into a world of infinite possibilities, a place where her choices could shape the fate of countless realms. And though the road ahead was uncertain, she wasn't afraid, because she was the keeper of the threshold. And this was only the beginning.